Hi everyone, my name is Mindy Casano and my term paper topic is translational research as it applies to self-control and impulsivity. There are three types of research: basic, applied, and translational. I think it's first important to define what these three are. Basic research focuses on fundamental principles and testing theories, usually consisting of non-human research in laboratory settings. Applied research draws on basic research, usually conducted in a clinical setting with human participants that study the relationship between problematic behavior and the intervention. Translational research can be defined as inquiry that breaks new ground by uniting a concern for fundamental principles for everyday problems and outcomes. Usually, basic research turns into applied research. This PowerPoint will talk about the connection between all three as it pertains to self-control and impulsive behavior. Let's first define what self-control is. Self-control, defined by Rothschild and Green, is choosing a larger, later reinforcer over a smaller, sooner reinforcer in concurrent situations. What is impulsivity? Impulsivity is just the opposite. It's choosing the smaller, sooner reinforcer over the larger, later reinforcer. So what does this mean in layman's terms? Would you rather receive $1,000 today or $5,000 in 6 months from now? Choosing the $5,000 in 6 months would show self-control. Choosing the $1,000 today would show impulsivity. So throughout my presentation, I'm going to talk about basic, applied, and translational research based on self-control and impulsivity. The first study to be discussed is Choice in Self-Control Paradigm, Effects of Feeding Procedure. Mazur and Logue study examines the effects of feeding reinforcement delight in a two-choice situation. In their procedures, there was a choice between a smaller, more immediate reinforcer, which is a 2-second access to green, or a larger 6-second access to green, which was the more delayed reinforcement. The factors that affected the pigeon's behavior in this basic study were the delay between the response and the reinforcement and the amount of reinforcement. Results indicated that the pigeons received the feeding procedure showed statistical differences, greater choice of the larger reinforcer relative to the group that did not receive the feeding procedures. This study also revealed that gradually introducing reinforcement delays is important in the choice situation and will be very helpful to the future research on self-control. Another basic study is Commitment, Choice, and Self-Control by Rothschild and Green. They examined if a commitment response will enhance choice of the larger, later reinforcer, and would the preference of the pigeon reverse as you reduce the time between choice X and choice Y. In this study, the larger, more delayed reinforcement was obtained at the expense of the smaller, more immediate one, raising the question on whether instances of delay of gratification and self-control rest on commitment. So you may be thinking, what is commitment? An applied example of commitment may be make the commitment and save the money, or do not make the commitment and spend the money. Rothschild and Green suggested that the amount in delay of reinforcement could be equated with the size of the reinforcement and the distance between the reinforcement. This next study, which is evaluating self-control and impulsivity in children with severe behavior disorders, is an applied study. The focus of the study was to talk about the difference between animals and humans. When animals are experimented in a laboratory setting and are given a choice between a smaller, more immediate reinforcer or a larger, more delayed reinforcer, they usually impulsively choose the smaller, sooner reinforcer. But Bomer et al. Said humans do engage in this impulsive behavior in a variety of situations, but they usually engage with more self-control. So why is this? In particular, in this study, when reinforcer access was immediate for both response alternatives, the students' time allocation was sensitive to the relative rate of reinforcement. The students, however, demonstrated impulsivity when the response alternatives were associated with unequal delays to reinforcer access. In this study, food was used as a reinforcer for both children, yogurt for one and chips for the other. In the testing condition, aggression produced access to one chip or one spoonful of yogurt for the other child. And MAMS, the functional equivalent behavior, produced access to 3 chips or 2 spoonfuls of yogurt for the second child. Their choice often resulted in sooner, immediate reinforcement instead of continuing to allocate their time in ways that would maximize the overall amount of reinforcement. Human studies typically involve secondary reinforcers, such as tokens. Non-human studies usually use primary reinforcers, such as food and water. However, in the study, primary reinforcers were used. This study suggests that behavior maintained by conditioned reinforcers, such as tokens, may be less likely to involve impulsivity, and may suggest why, in this study, the children preferred the smaller, sooner reinforcer. I found this particularly interesting. The next study to be discussed is the effects of choice on self-control. This study was conducted by Dixon and Tibbetts. They replicated and extended the research on the effects of self-control and choice interventions on task performance in individuals with traumatic brain injury, which is interesting because it was one of the topics of our modules for last week or the week before. The authors examined the effects of choice by providing a choice of arranging the events and delays by the participant or by the experimenter in the self-control paradigm. Now, this study was a little confusing, but to try to break it down to understand easily, there were 3 separate domains. The participants could do nothing and earn a small reinforcer, which was delivered immediately, or they could self-roll and do X for a duration, or the last one was the experimenter rolled and the child did X for the duration. The general results were that during the natural baseline condition, there was a low level of task engagement and coin sorting. During the choice baseline, there was a preference for the smaller, sooner reinforcer. During the self-control training, the participants chose the larger, later reinforcer over the smaller, more immediate reinforcement. The authors explained that self-control choosing the larger, later reinforcer extended into the choice baseline after participants had been exposed to the self-control training. This research supports the gradual fading of delay can alter preferences. This next study, I'm really not going to go into too much detail, as this was one of the articles that we had read for class last module. A preliminary analysis of self-control with aversive events, the effects of task, magnitude, and delay on the choices of children with autism. So this study was by Lerman, Addison, and Kodak, and they studied the effects of the amount and delays of tasks on choice behavior and examined the factors that may influence self-control and impulsivity in situations involving aversive events with 2 boys with autism. Participants were asked to choose between the 2 tasks that differ in the amounts of work that were needed to complete this task, or the amount of time that passed between the choice response and the start of the task. So, for example, one student was asked to put together 3 puzzle pieces or 24 puzzle pieces. Results from this study indicated that 2 of the 3 children engaged in responding that was sensitive to the differences in the amount and the delay of the aversive task. This next study by Neef et al. Was on the impulsivity in students with serious emotional disturbances, the interactive effects of reinforcer rate, delay, and quality. This was a great study that really showed the extension between basic research onto applied research. The purpose of the study was to extend this basic matching research on self-control and impulsivity and examine choices of students diagnosed as emotionally disturbed. The first experiment sought to determine the effects of the delay on choice behavior, most specifically on the interaction between unequal rates of reinforcement and equal versus unequal delays to reinforcer access on task performance. Experiment 2 assessed the interactive effect of reinforcer rate, quality, and delay on the choice behavior involving an atypical view of self-control and impulsivity. The discussion revealed that this study was effective in assessing sensitivity to different reinforcement parameters and how variables can be combined or manipulated strategically to influence clinical significant behavior. This last study is actually from our very own Dr. A.B. It's an evaluation of toy quality for increasing self-control and typically developing preschool children. The purpose was to extend previous research on the effects of access to different levels of toy preferences during delays, as well as control for reinforcement magnitude differences. The results were when the experimenter provided the toy access across all 3 choice options, self-control increased for 2 of the 5 children. For participant 1, regardless of the quality, access to the toys increased self-control. For participant 2, regardless of the toy quality, increased self-control during the initial phase, but then during the second phase, which was a break and different toys, only access to the moderate and highly preferenced toys increased the self-control. For participants 3, 4, and 5, self-control responses did not increase when toys were available for all choices. When delivery was restricted to the large delayed option, self-control did increase for participant 3. This was the high preference or moderate preference toy. And for participant 4, only when high preference toys were used. For participant 5, regardless of toy quality, self-control increased for the large delayed choice option. So here is the practical applications. The basic, applied, and translational articles that were discussed will help the author, myself, to use self-control training and interventions discussed with current students in public school settings, which is where I work. These interventions will be most helpful to increase self-control and decrease impulsivity with the reversive events such as with task demands. This is most specifically relating to the Lerman et al. 2006 study, and definitely something that I feel that I'm able to use with my students, as my students feel that all task demands are aversive. So an example is I can use these strategies when working with students who typically engage in this task avoidance behavior from a task demand, such as maybe a science worksheet. The goal would be to minimize the child from engaging in the maladaptive behavior by using a more functionally appropriate way to escape the task, such as requesting a break. A child could then be given a worksheet with multiple science questions. The child would then be told if answered 5 problems, he could earn 10 minutes of break time, or he could answer 2 questions and earn 4 minutes of break time. This shows the self-control impulsivity paradigm. The child could choose more break time for the completion of more questions, or less break time for the completion of less questions. In addition, the research conducted so far clarifies the rate of reinforcement, quality of reinforcement, and delay on choice behavior does, in fact, have an effect on self-control and impulsivity. So after careful analysis of these studies, future research is needed to expand on self-control and impulsivity in both the applied and translational settings. Future experimenters are needed to evaluate strategies to enhance self-control involving aversive events, such as task demands in school settings. That's of particular interest to myself. An interesting question came up during analysis when I was working on reading these articles and summarizing them. If adults restrict access to toys, will this increase the efficacy of the intervention, such as in the Wanako et al. 2016 article? This is the one that Dr. A.B. contributed to. To further extend these findings to the assessment of behavioral disorders, one can do an experimental comparison by conducting between briefly signaled and signal delayed in a similar format to the Vollmer et al. 1999 article, where signaled and unsignaled delays are compared. So, in conclusion, to repeat, basic research has served as the foundation for research in applied behavior analysis. Translational research begins with findings from the laboratory that are then replicated and extended to clinical populations and lead to effective clinical treatments. Future research is needed to investigate the efficacy of treatments derived from basic findings and to evaluate the applicability of these interventions. Already, this connection from what may be considered 2 different worlds has shown probable outcomes and advancements, specifically with self-control. Self-control, again, is choosing the larger later reinforcer over a smaller sooner reinforcer in concurrent situations. However, future studies are still needed on self-control and impulsivity as it relates to rate of reinforcement, quality of reinforcement, and delay on choice behavior. Combining basic, applied, and translational research, learning and building upon each other can advance science and technology and lead to continued success and knowledge in behavioral research and principles. And these are the references that I used for my paper. So I hope you enjoyed, and I really hope that you learned something new. Thanks.